Okay, it is 8:30 p.m. Today is Thursday, July the 22nd, 2021. Welcome to week number 3, which means we're going to be halfway home at the end of this week. And I want to make sure that you're aware of the rule that at the end of week 3, starting in week 4, assignments that are due for weeks 1, 2, and 3 will not be accepted. Discussion posts are always excluded because you know the rule on that. And that I just want to remind you to make sure that you follow the rubric. But you guys already should know that because many of you have had me in more than one class, and you know how important citations in the body and references at the end, the cover page, double space, and follow the standards that I set out here as well. So I'm going to get right into the textbook. I mean, not in the textbook, into the module for this week. Okay. So you see, I'm going to start with entering the student preview mode. All right. So let's get to, you see my emails. These are the assignments that are due this week. The infographic assignment, your discussion post, professional writing, which of course the initial post was due the day before yesterday or the 20th. And then your reply post will be due Saturday, a couple of days from now. And then your live lecture will be also due the 25th. So you got your written assignment and the live classroom lecture. So let's look at the infographic and view the assignment that you have for that. There it is. So you're going to deal about the rights of citizens under the Constitution. You're going to think critically about the offender rights and how those rights can be affected adversely and affect justice for victims by tying the hands of police, often making it difficult to control or deter. So in a Word document, notice it says Word, Fourth and Fifth Amendment, analyze how they are or how they apply, which guarantees due process through protection against unreasonable search and seizures. And that's the fourth. And interrogations limit the efforts of law enforcement, but discuss why these rights are important. Give me the advantage and disadvantages of the rights. Determine whether you think the rights are reasonable or if they unduly limit justice for victims. Then create an infographic or a chart showing both sides of the rights afforded by the Fourth and Fifth Amendment and the importance of protecting these rights. Okay. And then there's a little link. Now remember, the infographic must be Word. It cannot be PowerPoint and it cannot be PDF. Okay, and I'm going to go over the rubric in just a few minutes. Okay, you should know about the Fourth and Fifth Amendment because the first week of assignments you dealt with that. So your discussion post involves at least 250 words to discuss the writing and its accuracy, concise, factual, professional, unbiased. And then I always talk about the importance of Writing, as you know, dealing with our transferable skill of communication. We deal with written and oral communication by students. And I've pointed out to you the importance of proper grammar, spelling, because if it is, as it says here, writing that contains errors such as grammar or spelling can diminish credibility. I've demonstrated that before by talking about how I've used that in court when asking a officer or the author of a report when I had them on the stand, and discuss the outcome of justice professional, such as the probation, parole, or police officer, and the importance of submitting written documentation that has incorrect or incomplete information. Be sure to research and cite at least one source in your post, which is okay. You don't have to. In the reply post, comment on a peer's post who raised a different issue. So be aware, though, that it is so important because your reports end up being exhibits in court, and you can be discredited by the defense attorney, which I spent many years doing that, where there were spelling errors, even where you used lowercase I standing alone. I would do that even though it's very minor. There was a reason for that. The point of the matter is it showed that you were unprofessional in your work. So it is very, very important. The prosecution will rely on your correct reports, given the facts and information, and also proper grammar, spelling, and things of that nature as well. So you're going to submit that initial post as of Tuesday the 20th, and reply post as of Saturday the 24th. And then your live classroom lecture, you already know how to do that as well. Okay, so now let's get out of this, and I want to go back and I want to show you the rubric for this written assignment. Here it is right here. So remember what I said. You're going to deal in the mastery column so that you can adequately get the right amount of points. So the criteria says Fourth and Fifth Amendment may limit law enforcement. So you're going to describe clear and comprehensive analysis of how it may limit law enforcement. Okay. The second part is the importance of the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. Why the Fourth and Fifth Amendment are important and so important to the criminal justice system. Right? We talked about, again, the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment during week 1. The advantages and disadvantages of the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. And then make sure it's a chart or infograph showing both sides of the rights according to the Fourth or Fifth, and they're clear and comprehensive. Now, be aware that you need to have sources cited. You need to cite your sources throughout this paper. Otherwise, you end up in emerging because it's going to be an unclear discussion. Without the sources to support your statements, it goes into unclear. Okay? So you want to ignore these 3 columns and focus on these. I say that over and over and over and over again. Okay? Again, make sure you have your cover page. Make sure that you have it in APA formatted. Again, remember, it's an infograph. You're providing information on one side, the Fourth Amendment, one side, the Fifth Amendment. All right, so we've covered all of this. So now, before we get into the lecture itself, let's take a good look at the course calendar. The month version. So you could see this is where we are today. You see your initial post was due on Tuesday, and your reply post due Saturday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard. And then your written assignment and your live lecture are due the 25th. Okay? And be aware that the course ends on the 10th. So you have less than a month before this course ends. It ends on a Tuesday, not the 11th, not the 12th, not the 13th, 14th, or 15th, but the 10th, because term 2 starts the next day, the 11th. So don't be trying to submit assignments after that. They will not be graded. I don't care how good they are. Let's take a look at the announcements right quick. The announcement for this week deals with the topic of professional communication skills, and to make sure you understand there are some activities involving verbal and non-verbal communication, communication barriers, and written communication. And then the lecture is taking place right now. The discussion assignment, professional writing. We already said the deadline, but I'll say it again. The initial post is due on Tuesday, the 20th, and the reply post is due Saturday, the 24th, Central Standard Time. Finally, complete the written assignment relating to the infographic. And then make sure you get the key phrase as well. Try to complete the mid-quarter survey as well, because it lets us know how you feel about the course. And then at the bottom, this statement is in every announcement for weekly announcements. Be strong and finish strong. Remember, you're almost at the halfway point. And then you know what my motto is: adversity, springboard success. You all know all too well what that is all about. All right, so now let's get into the topics. So it's going to be the live recording will be posted here, and then it will be emailed to you as well, but you know that already. So we're going to talk about these three sections here. So let me explain to you. First of all, one of the most critical things that you can do is provide accurate documentation of what's involved. Writing reports are the beginning and the end of good reports, good law enforcement work, whether it's police, whether it's probation, parole, whatever it is. So it says you spend roughly 5 hours completing written documentation. Every officer has to be able to document that correctly. And now you must make sure that they are accurate, and don't try to doctor them up, because you know what will happen. If you don't, I'll say it. There's videos on the scene. There's body cams. There's dash cams. There's cameras in the area. There's individuals who have cell phones, are able to record, as you already know about the infamous Derek Chauvin case in Minnesota. What turned that case was actually a video that a citizen provided that demonstrated how the officer and officers did not follow protocol and did some things that were excessive in force that resulted in the death of Mr. Floyd. Says documentation must be factual, logical, honest, unbiased, and accurate without error. One error can throw the whole thing off. Look, I'm going to just repeat what it says. Police reports are read by many professionals, starting with the officers, sergeant, prosecutors, judges, jurors, defense attorneys, caseworkers, probation and parole officers, doctors, insurance company, social service agency, crisis workers, and many, many others. Any mistake can make the author or officer appear incompetent and result in the officer's credibility being questioned in a court or hearing. So it is, I can't stress how important your written documentation is, and the importance of it is not to be considered as something that you even want to do too fast. You want to make sure that you get the information, because it can make or break a case. Even your testimony orally can be contradicted by the documentation or reports, by the cameras, and other types of testimony. Eyewitnesses, the whole 9 yards. So we deal with verbal and written communication, which interpersonal communication, because you're communicating with others. And you're going to exchange ideas, information, and think about, as it says, the role of a probation officer when he must document the violations of a probation to a judge. Or if a police officer has to write a narrative, that's where we eat it up as defense attorneys about an incident. So in the documents, the information could negatively impact the freedom of another individual. Therefore, the writing must be truthful, accurate, and free of any errors. If I sound like I'm repeating myself, it's because I am. And the reason why, I want to make sure. It is imperative that you have professional communication skills. For the reason here, it says officers should be able to write professionally, including only the factual, unbiased, not your opinion, not your opinion. Please get out of that habit. Or accusations, use correct dates and times. Speaking of that, I once won a case because in a police report and in the testimony of witnesses, they said that my client committed the offense on April 31st. And that one little error, I harped on it. And then I was able to establish that that was incorrect. And I was able to take some good old commonsensical things I learned as a kid. I remember vividly in my closing argument, after it was established that that was the testimony of the written, and at one point they said it might have been a mistake. Well, that's ears. Those are words to my ears, made me happy. But when I did my closing arguments, I pointed out that my client could not have done this offense, and it is impossible for him to have done it on the date that they said it, because I recited a poem that says 30 days has September, April, June, and November. And when I got to April, I says, 30 days has September, April. And I was looking at the jury and slowly saying it. So All the rest have 31, it says, except the month of February. The jury had that nailed into their heads. And then that was one of the main reasons they said we have to have doubt, because the prosecution didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, because the information was incorrect in the report. They couldn't redact it. The point of the matter is, that's why I said accurate times, locations, names, and all those things. So it must fairly describe the violations, who violated them, who, how, when, and why, for the judge to render a fair decision. So it's so important. It's so important. I taught a course, and the name of the course was Effective Written and Oral Communication in Law Enforcement. And I spent so much time with my students explaining the reason for the importance of that. So you need to get that into you while you're in school and carry it outside of school. All right. Verbal and nonverbal communication. Verbal is talking, okay, and writing. It says you write reports, incident reports, memos, arrest reports, emails. Emails, by the way, same thing, are now admissible. Okay, memoranda, and very important. For example, probation, parole, corrections, and police officers' written reports are read in court. I already covered that, so I won't go over that anymore. Verbal communication is broken down into 5 general areas: responding, reporting, interviewing, interrogating, and then testifying. All those elements you must be very well versed and must perform at a high level. Very important. Nonverbal communication makes up, look what it says, 93% of the information in a face-to-face situation. Body language is a form of nonverbal communication, as are gestures, of course, tone of voice, and facial expressions. It's important that justice professionals understand how to read body language as an indicator. I heard somebody once say, I couldn't understand the spoken language because I wasn't fluent. It was Spanish. They said, but I did understand the body language. I understood where that person was coming from. So like the body language, for example, is no is this way. Yes, I don't know. It could be a shrug of the shoulders, those kind of things. And one of the important parts of nonverbal communication starts with what I have in that mnemonic that I share with you at the beginning of the course in the lounge area, where I talk about the word lawyers, and the L stands for listening. Listening. Active listening. Active listening. That means focusing in on who you are talking to. Multitasking during a time when you should be listening is counterproductive, because you can't be an active listener and multitask at the same time. Barriers to communication can be based on the culture, psychological or physical. Lack of attention or interest or distractions, such as traffic or noise, as I said, and other things. Cultural barriers can occur if an understanding of someone's personal space or touching, as in handshakes, appreciate the culture of those individuals. Consequences of ineffective documentation result in, once again, losing credibility, possibly violating that individual's rights, leaving factual information out of document, and even having evidence that could be suppressed or thrown out and not be able to use, and thus losing a case. The final thing that I want to say is anyone working in criminal justice, I like to read this last one, will need to communicate with special populations that require specific attention, such as the hearing or sight impaired. You might have to have those with mental health or substance abuse issues, and the culturally diverse, people who are different from you. Remember, we talked about diversity in culture the first week. And other communication functions, such as resolving conflict verbally or in stressful situations. So I guess what I'm really saying, that you need to be fluent in that. Notice the last sentence, the last paragraph, should I say. In addition to what I previously said, criminal justice professionals must be fluently able to utilize technology, computers, to research, report writing, and investigations, as well as updating department and social media sites. And that has to do with what we call digital fluency. We talked about that as one of our transferable skills, and that's why we harp on that. And so these at the bottom are the sources that were used to put this section together. So I think you got the point. It's not a lackadaisical thing. It's not an unimportant thing. It's not a, oh, okay. No, it's something that you really need to be good at. So what are the communication barriers? Barriers can be organizational, all the way to cultural, semantic, where a person's words may mean something different. Like somebody might say, that's really bad. And then you might not understand that that means in a positive way. Dealing in the gender of individuals, perceptual, personal, all the way around. So the thing is that you have to understand that the language and the culture of individuals is so important. And it says, while there are many barriers to effective communication, such as dealing with non-English speaking people, there are also what we call experiential, physical, psychological, listening, and cultural barriers. You have to be able to overcome these because you're dealing with a diverse populations. And you should be aware of the audience that you're dealing with. You may have to have a partner or someone to help you. Physical barriers, dealing with the outside environment. You might be in a rainy or cold, dark, or rainy snow or something. There may be barking dogs, large groups of people, so forth and so on. Notice the thing that they tried to argue in the Chauvin case is that there was a crowd out there, and that took the officer's mind off of what he was doing. Not acceptable. It is not acceptable. It is not a way out. It does not mitigate or diminish the actions. Psychological barriers occur when officers are afraid. I have discovered that in talking to some Caucasian officers about the way that they feel about encountering black suspects, because of the fear that has been developed from not knowing these kinds of people. There is a fear or threat that arises, and it results sometimes in the use of excessive force. By the way, I'll save this next statement for the section after this one. So then we come to listening. I already told you about that. Active listening, very important. you sometimes it says too often officers will simply nod or even become impatient while listening to a complainant and say, get to the point. That is problematic. You need to listen to the narrative of the individual, because oftentimes hurrying someone causes them to freeze up and not properly give you the information that you want to have. Okay, you want to let people speak. You want to operate in an empathetic fashion. Um, there was a TV show used to come on when I was a kid called Dragnet and Officer Friday. In the late 90s, Tom Hanks and the guy Henry Morgan, who was one of the actual parties from the 50s and 60s in Dragnet. Joe Friday was Dan Aykroyd. Dan Aykroyd. And a very courteous and kind individual in dealing with people. You don't use obscenity. You can raise your voice when it becomes necessary in a situation to control it. But when you're questioning people, you have to be very careful about the level that you speak. And again, the person is not a piece of S. The person is a human being. I don't care if they're a mass murderer. I don't care if they shot a cop and those kind of things. You have to be very careful about that. And so listening is very important. As I often remind people, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we need to be using these more than this sometimes, unless we're supposed to do that at the appropriate time. Language, because there are various cultures, it says language barriers can be easily overcome by officers carrying on access to translation devices or cell phone apps. I kind of don't like those because they develop an interpersonal communication with the person. The best thing is to have a partner or someone who you can trust to translate. You don't always want someone in the neighborhood to translate for you because you don't know who that person is, and it can jeopardize the information and facts that you're trying to get. Okay, another translation device is the language line. That is a phone number that connects an interpreter who will translate. Again, the best method to me is to have a partner or someone on the scene. We have this problem coming up constantly that I'm about to address next. Oh, back to the language and speaking to people. Be courteous. Stay professional. Mental disorders. It's one of the big problems that we have in crime today. Deal with mental illness, drugs, and alcoholism. Mental illness can result in an officer acting in the wrong fashion. And that's why now more and more departments should have psychological or counselors with them to be able to assess the situation. They don't have to be police officers carrying weapons, but they are there to assist the officer and dealing with the individuals in these mental disorder cases, because all too often there are deaths that don't have to take place. Sociological barriers arise in disadvantaged communities. Feedback from the police is important as to how they respond and deal with situations that occur in disadvantaged communities. It says a complaint often heard from residents of any community is that police don't give them the information on how their complaint was resolved. Unless the situation ends in a court hearing, most complainants never hear how their complaint was resolved. So this creates a problem and mistrust as well as other issues. We already talked about technology, so I'm going to skip over that as well. So we use technology to help us. That's it for that. Let's go to the last section, written communication. We already kind of talked about that, but I'm going to go over it pretty fast. Mistakes can be fatal. As I already said, it is so important, your punctuation, your spelling, your sequence, your grammar, your sentence structure. Says written reports, if not, did I do this already? Yes, but I'm doing it again. Written reports, if not correctly done, can damage an officer's credibility. Then defense attorneys sift through to find any small error. I told you, like I did with that date. I've even had individuals on the stand and they use lowercase I, standing alone, and I read it out. I says, could you read your report? And then they'll say, well, I saw. I said, excuse me, did you use lowercase I to describe I? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, okay. I don't harp on it, says, don't you know better? No, I don't say that. That's just enough, because I'll use that later in my closing argument to say that officer's unprofessional. But oftentimes when I do that, what officers will do, and this happened so many times, is that, well, I made a mistake. I meant to, yeah, okay, thank you, thank you. Soon as I hear that word, mistake, it's like music to a defense attorney's ears. Look what it says. Mistakes in a written report can prove deadly to the officer's career. And then it explains things that I just said about it. Notice it says in here, in this paragraph, I want to read it to you. A significant portion of any justice career, from police officer to judge, requires substantial writing and documentation. Transferable skills, you remember that? Of which communication is the most significant and very important to all employers. You heard that from me if you were in any of my classes. They include communication such as, here we go, critical thinking, digital fluency, information literacy, ethics, and teamwork, straight out of our transferable skills. So it is important for you to recognize the things that we do. We're not picking on you. We're preparing you for professionals. Reports, we've already talked about that. Look what it says, criminal justice students and written communication. Pay attention to this. Like justice personnel, students throughout their college career spend a considerable amount of time involved in written communication that must exhibit precise spelling, grammar, punctuation, sentencing structure. We also point out to you providing sources to support your statements. It says this skill should be fully developed by the time a student graduates and seeks employment. Employers are looking for that. It is, as a quote, it is recognized that the skill of writing reports is valued by employers. So assessments should be based on report writing. So you see what I mean. It's not a little thing. Finally, at the end, the example of an inconsistent police report. Let's read this. And if you were here, I would have you to point out. Read the following story as an example of how inconsistent police reports cause a guilty defendant to walk free. I am reminded of a case that occurred while the person says they were a 911 dispatcher for the Lawrence Police Department. It was a case of Kai Johnson in 1995 who shot and killed another man, Kenneth McBride, at a Rider University school dance in Lawrence Township. The shooting was witnessed by an off-duty Lawrence Township police officer, so there was no question as to who the shooter was. The officer wrote in his report, "I watched the shooter get into a yellow Volkswagen in the passenger side. The car was stopped by another officer before it left the campus, and the suspect was apprehended." Now, when the officer who stopped the car found Mr. Kai Johnson, he wrote in his report that Kai was sitting in the back seat. You see the contradiction? But this was contradictory to what the eyewitness told Officer Wright when he said he watched Kai get into the passenger side. So we know it's possible and very easy to crawl into the back seat. We also know that the Volkswagen do not have 4 doors, so the only way Kai could have gotten into the car was the passenger side. Yet because Kai's defense attorney, Robin K. Lord, found this one insignificant, did you hear me, inconsistency between the two narratives in the report, she was able to plant doubt in the mind. Did you hear what I said? As she said, due to the ineptitudeness of the police, they found Kai not guilty. As we say in the law business, as lawyers, we rest our case on that. So you see, we're trying to get you to understand the importance of this, the seriousness of it. All right. Well, that's it for today. I don't have anything else to add. I hope that you have understood that this whole time that I've been speaking, I've been focusing on the excellence in written and oral communication, report writing, consistently with what actually happened at the scene. Just as that illustration I gave at the end, how the defense attorney picked out that little thing. Just as I told you, I as a defense attorney picked out lowercase i's, how I picked out misspellings before, how I picked out that that April 31st that my client committed the offense. Know what somebody said? They said, "Oh, that was a little point." Guess what? It was adequate enough for the jury to come back with a not guilty, which, by the way, later on we did find out they got the right decision. But the point of the matter is I'm just trying to get across to you guys so that you understand what this whole week's module is all about. You might want to take this and never forget the things that are said in this lecture, because it could come back and bite you in the butt. It could come back and cost you your career. It can result in what we call impeachment, which means that the attorney can then catch you not in a lie necessarily, but in an important mistake. What are important mistakes? By fact, things that the trier of fact, in my case, most of the time it was jurors who would find. You say, "Oh, it's just a little thing." Remember, you got to prove a person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And just one scintilla of doubt can open the door for an acquittal of a person who probably deserves to be behind bars, but would not be so. Okay? So with that, I'm going to say good night to you guys. I want to just remind you again, remember, very important, very important. Don't make mistakes. They can be costly. So what am I going to give you as a key phrase today? One word. Mistakes. Give me mistakes and you got your point. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I want you to have that in the forefront of something that you don't do. I'll see you next Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard. Get those assignments in and have a fantastic week and stay safe.